interruptions in this edition of Dreamland, either on our free stream or, of course, as there never are for our subscribers. And the reason is that people often ask me, why do I do this? Why do I keep doing it? And I'm not on the air anymore. It's because largely I don't want to be on the air anymore. I'm not really talking to that audience. I'm talking to people who want to seek this out. These are the people who are important and to me, and the people who I want to reach. I'm not really interested in reaching people who just by some chance happen to tune across the dial and hear something slightly vaguely interesting to them. You're into this. That's why you're here on this website. And William Henry has come up with something I think that's terribly important because it is a step beyond where we all are right now in terms of spiritual growth in the direction needed to face the time of change that is already upon us. As I speak, the weather in the Midwest and the northeastern United States has been ultra wild recently. People are dead from unexpected tornadoes coming down out of the night. Temperature gradients have dropped 30 degrees in some areas in just a few minutes. And everyone knows about all the hurricanes, the other storms, the earthquakes, and so forth. And 2012 is still years away. We've got a lot of distance to travel between now and then. And because you want to travel this distance toward consciousness rather than away from it, you're listening to this right now. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome William Henry to this radio program on this very special experience of talking about his new book, The Illuminator.
Thank you, Whitley. Thanks again very much for having me on the show.
Well, you know, I'm pretty surprised at certain things that you've done in this book. Let me ask you first, and I've asked you this question before, and you never give me a straight answer. And yet now I see from the beginning, when I discovered your work through Nick Begich of Earth Pulse Press, your first early book that he published, I was so struck by the degree of kind of hidden knowledge that you possessed. And that has gone on and on and on until now you come up with something so extraordinary in the Illuminator that I was very amazed when I opened the pages of this, and it felt like information that I had always known, but that had never kind of articulated itself in my mind, like you unlocked a door. And William, I want to know your version, and I know that how do you do this?
Well, it's a constant process for me of amassing historical information, new data, always looking for that missing piece of the puzzle that seems to elude us all the time. And it just seems that as you pick up one piece, there's yet another piece that needs to be picked up. I've so often reminded myself and others that I think that people so often talk about the truth as if there is one whole truth, but in fact what we're dealing with are shards of the truth, pieces of it that get picked up, and every now and then we claim that that small piece is the actual truth, but really it's just part of a larger whole. And it's been my constant quest to gather as many of those pieces as possible.
Well, William, there is structurally across the whole body of your work a kind of progression of insight, and this partly reflects study, I know that, but the critical insight in the Illuminator is so far beyond anything else. And folks, what we're going to be talking about is, I'm not playing games with you. I'm not going to do radio talk show host tricks, which I know very well how to do, to put off the key stuff and put it off until right at the end we finally say, and the skeleton was in, and then you hear the music and it's over. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay. In the Illuminator, you begin to talk about a physical relationship between the body and the soul, and a way of reaching enlightenment through, I believe, if I'm not correct, if I understand the first part of it correctly, the alchemy of scent. But let's first talk about the skeleton. Tell us, William, a little bit about what you have found out about the human skeleton.
Well, the human skeleton is what we think of as the temple. Whenever we're in a piece of myth or scripture and we see the word temple referenced, we can substitute with the words human skeletal structure. The bones are, in a sense, an archive of ancient knowledge, and if we can learn how to tap into the bones, they will reveal the secrets of where we came from, who we are. I mean, after all, our bones are literally composed of matter that was sprung from supernova explosions in distant galaxies. And because of that, we have a connection with the stars built right into ourselves. And so what I've attempted to do is to look at the body as the temple. I reference Solomon's temple, for example, in the book. And one way we can think of Solomon's temple is that it is literally the soul's temple. And that's what the human body is, in my view.
Now, soul, in this sense, also refers to light, to the sun.
That's right. Yes, it does.
Tell us a little bit about that relationship.
Well, you have that funny wordplay of soul spelled S-O-L, which means sun, it means light, and then you have S-O-U-L, which refers to our divine essence, the soul. And it's very interesting the way that those terms come together in a word such as Solomon, in the reference to Solomon's temple.
Now, these words, and one of the things about your work that's so fascinating to me is that, and this is more true as time goes on, but you're beginning to use relationships between, for example, the many ancient Egyptian words that have entered the English language in one way or another, and the hidden structures in those words in English. And you speak of an author who has been one of my favorites for many, many years of my life, Harold Bailey.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, tell us who he was and why the work he did is so important in the larger sense.
Harold Bailey was an early 20th century British author. He was very interested in the language symbolism. In fact, he has a book that's still available today, a 2-volume set called The Lost Language of Symbolism, in which he chronicled the Cathar's use of ancient symbols, and he was among the first to really connect the Cathar symbols with other cultures such as Egypt to reveal the incredible mystic knowledge that the Cathars possessed. But in addition, Harold Bailey also used phonetic resonance between words in English to reveal otherwise hidden meanings. And this is something that caught my attention, and as I started to work with this process of using phonetic resonance in English, it started to open up some incredible doors that most people aren't even aware existed.
Well, tell us a little bit about the doors that it opened up.
Well, for me, Whitley, what it showed is that, wait a minute, there is this interconnection between all of these languages, and that by following this trail of words that sound alike in English, suddenly we're connecting things that seemingly don't belong together, but when you look at it, it makes perfect sense that they belong together.
Now, give us some examples of what you mean here.
Well, one of the classic examples that I like to cite, and to use contemporary vernacular, contemporary vernacular, is the word terror. I mean, we hear politicians come on television all the time talking about, hey, we're winning the war on terror. And sometimes if they're from the South, they'll say that, they'll pronounce it by saying, we're winning the war on terror. And to my ear, it sounds like what they're saying is the word Tara, spelled T-A-R-A, which is in fact a Buddhist term. It's a term for the Buddhist goddess of compassion. And it makes me wonder if, in fact, there is a war on compassion and enlightenment that is unfolding in our world right now. It shows us in this very simple example how the power of our words can have such a dramatic impact.
Well, there is such a war, and it unfolded. The whole war was initiated with a single gunshot, a bullet moving out of a gun in Serbia and into the head of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which destabilized our world. That instability has continued ever since. Our world has literally lost its ability to direct itself. It is crashing. It's going down in flames. Now, we've had a respite when the defeat of first the Nazis and then communism should have brought in an era of peace, but the world leadership was quick to make certain that did not happen. Why, William, would they do that when we had the chance after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the collapse of the Soviet Union to become a much more peaceful world? Why didn't we?
Well, based upon the research that I did for the Illuminator in researching the early Gnostic Christian relationship with a group of beings who called themselves archons or rulers, we seem to be dealing with a relationship between the powers that be and an extraterrestrial force that feeds on human fear, that seeks to keep us in a realm of terror. I mean, I was astounded to the way that this word terror was reintroduced in such a massive way into our vocabulary back in 2001. At that time, I had been researching the Maya prophecies that said that we're entering an era between the year 2000 and 2012 in which we would be experiencing an increase of compassion and enlightenment in our world. In fact, we would be entering an age of terror, of compassion and enlightenment. And suddenly, here comes this word terror that seems to fix us like dogs chained to a pole to this frequency of fear. And the only explanation that I can have for the reason why they would want us to be chained in this way to the word terror is because they know that an unstoppable force is entering into our world. A new light is emerging, and the last thing they want to have happen is to have a civilization full of enlightened people or people that are on the path to enlightenment.
At what points is this entering our world?
At what point is it entering?
At what points is this new light entering? Yes.
Well, it's an individual by individual basis. I travel a lot, and it's amazing to me the sheer number of new people that are suddenly awakening. And this is occurring on a daily basis because of works like, recently the Da Vinci Code, and others that are starting to awaken people that, wait a minute, there is another version to this story. And when they begin to look at the parallel version, especially of the Christian story, and they jump tracks into the esoteric or Gnostic version of the story, this is what is driving their awakening. And this is why I feel that there's such a rise of fundamentalism on the planet right now, why the various governments and religions are trying to lock down various sacred places, why people are trying to dig their roots deep into the past and try and stay there. But everything that we see about us is causing change and asking us to awaken to this change and, in fact, to become a part of it.
The really important work, folks, goes on behind the scenes. In other words, what these world leaders are doing to prevent access to important material in Egypt, thanks to Zahi Hawass and his friends, or to destroy materials or steal them or hide them in some way in Iraq, thanks to our games that we're playing there. That doesn't actually matter. What matters is that you not let that use you to eat your energy. Those items are of no importance, because what is really of importance is something that this gentleman, William Henry, knows a whole lot about. It's in our bodies. Now, William, just before we go on, since we have no ads this time, folks, I want to remind you, the Illuminator is available from the unknowncountry.com bookstore. You can get it. It's there. Do get it. Do read it. And also, I will remind you that this thing keeps going because of your subscriptions. And I know I get letters all the time from people saying, why don't you just take ads? I will not do that. Absolutely not. Because this belongs to you. You have to say, you have to make an inner movement toward this thing. This is a very serious business that's going on here. It's not like radio shows. It's not a commercial enterprise at all. Ann and I pay a lot of money every month, at least $3,000 or $4,000 to keep this website going. And your subscriptions, if we had to pay much more than that, we wouldn't be able to, but we are able. So you help us if you can, and subscribe as well. Now let's get back to the Illuminator. William, who exactly is the Illuminator? And I want to go ahead and answer that, and then we'll go on into more detail about that.
Well, according to Jacobus de Voragine, who was a 13th century Italian chronicler of the myths and legends of the saints, Mary Magdalene is the Illuminator. And he called her that because she was considered in the parallel Gnostic tradition to be the enlightened one. She was the one who brought about awakening, and for this reason he called her the Illuminator.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Cathars and the Gnostic tradition, and then we'll get more into him and his work and why it's just disappeared. But tell us a little bit. Let's go back to Bailey, if we can, and talk a little bit more about these symbols and who were these people? What were they like, and where were they?
The Cathars lived in southern France, Whitley. They lived in the region that includes this area of mystery called Rennes-le-Château.
Where you have been.
Yes, where I've been numerous times pursuing these mysteries and attempting to more fully understand this incredible transfer of knowledge that the Cathars have offered to us. They claimed that they were given a symbol system from a group of people called the Desposini. The Desposini is a word that refers to the family of the Lord. Authors such as Lawrence Gardner and even Father Malachi Martin have concluded that this family of the Lord we're referring to are the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And the idea is that they possessed a secret teaching that somehow transformed them into more advanced humans. And that this symbol system that they possessed was given to the Cathars. They preserved it for a number of years until they were persecuted by the Catholic Church during the Inquisition. After this time, this symbol system goes underground and is preserved in the watermarks or paper marks of the Cathars, which were ultimately collated by Harold Bailey and put in his book, The Lost Language of Symbolism.
Tell us a little bit about some of these symbols and what they may mean.
Well, there's some incredible ones. They called themselves the good people, which I think is a wordplay or a pun on the God people. They were literally God's people.
It's also what the people of the fairy faith called the little creatures known as fairies. And there's a lot of other references that seem to link the two things in your book, although you don't mention the fairy faith directly.
No, I don't, but you're right. It is always behind the scenes, and the reason I didn't mention it is because I'm still doing research on that. In my recent trip to Rennes-le-Château back in the summer of this year of '05, I was pursuing some of the mysteries of how the Knights Templar and even Mary Magdalene may have been interacting with the fairy folk in recovering alluvial gold, this ancient gold that had been mined there near Rennes-le-Château. So there's no question that that's a big part of this story, which I'll probably be commenting again on in the future in a later work. But behind this is this whole idea that through this symbol system that the Cathars possessed, it represents the actual original Christian teaching that enables one to transform themselves into one of these, what we might think of as a Christ-like being. It is the language of the illumined ones, the language of the Illuminator, Mary Magdalene herself.
Because, in my opinion, Christ left behind a sign of his illumination in the form of the Holy Shroud. And I'm sorry that, people who think it was a medieval forgery, I think they're just wrong. I think that's been proved amply. And who think it can be explained in some other way, well, there are similar things can be made similar to the shroud. But when you see that in fact, the weave of the thing and the more recent carbon dating that's been done, and the materials, pollens and so forth that were found on the shroud, place it at the time of Jesus in the Holy Land, then you come to the conclusion that something extraordinary happened there, that an energy was released from that man as he ascended out of the tomb, and that the signal of it was left on that cloth. Now, that wouldn't have been done if there was no way for us to follow this and do it too. Remember this. The whole power of the church and the great, vast evil that has been done is to say that there must be something between you and Christ. There must be a whole institution, an edifice, a set of moral laws set down by others, and not only that, but that you're born evil. So you have to go to the church for salvation. You only have one place to go. It's always been the same place, the kingdom of God within us. That is to say, the house of Christ, the tomb, our bodies. Tell us a little bit more. Let's talk now about anointing and the process of anointing, William.
Well, yeah, this is the subject that prompted me to write this book, The Illuminator, because very often you come across these references to Mary Magdalene and her anointing oil, and they talk in terms that this was some kind of a nard substance that might even have been spikenard. I happen to disagree with that. I think that nard is a catch-all phrase. I came across some research by an Assyrian researcher, a researcher into ancient Assyria, who was examining the pharmacological texts of the ancient Assyrians. And this is something that traditional scholars had looked at for years, and they dismissed these early Assyrian pharmacists as being very primitive because they used such things as pig droppings and dog poop in their medicines. And so the modern scholar looks at that and says, oh my, what primitive people these must have been. But then there was one scholar who looked at those same texts and said, that doesn't make sense. And so he did some digging, and what he discovered was the actual code books where it was revealed that the pig droppings referred to such and such, and the dog poop referred to another substance. And the reason that they used those terms was so that their competitors wouldn't be able to figure out what they were doing, nor could their patients go ahead and mix up these concoctions themselves. And so I think that when we are talking about Mary Magdalene using nard to anoint Jesus, that is a catch-all phrase that refers to another substance altogether. And by calling it nard, that pretty well dismisses about 99% of the people who are looking at that story. They're going to accept it as literal truth that that's what it was. But in reality, I think we're talking about something completely different. And what my research revealed is that Mary Magdalene and Jesus, first and foremost, were not the simple-minded people that led fairly simple lives that are often portrayed in the cartoon version of their lives. These people were hardcore esoteric researchers. I mean, traditional Christianity very seldom, if ever, portrays Jesus and Mary Magdalene in their natural habitat, in temples such as Dendera in Egypt and Abydos in Egypt, both of which were used, especially Dendera, as perfumeries. And when we talk about a perfumery in the ancient world, it's very interesting to learn that what we are talking about are substances that dealt with our spiritual well-being more than it did with a scent that enhanced our physical attractiveness. And this is the core of my investigation into Mary Magdalene, revealed in The Illuminator, is that she was a hardcore esoteric researcher who was well-schooled in the ancient schools of Isis, of Inanna, of Istara, of Mari, and all the other ancient goddesses. and that she had the capability of creating a substance, a cosmic substance, and when she anointed Jesus, she was actually embalming him. She was preparing him for that experience you described just a moment ago that is presented in the artifact we call the Shroud of Turin.
Exactly. Now, William, let's go in a little bit into, because a lot of us are hearing this for the first time, suddenly a link between the physical world around us and enlightenment through the body, through the medium of the body, as a medium of exchange between the physical world and the spiritual world. We're plugged in to the physical world. The plug is the body. Now, the soul, the essence, the odor. Let's talk about the way scent enters the body and affects the brain through the amygdala, as you discuss it in the book.
Yeah, that is one of the most incredible pieces of information that I think we can talk about in terms of Mary Magdalene. People don't exactly agree on the meaning of the word Magdala, but as we've been talking, it's vital that we try to find ways to take myth and scripture and put it inside the body. And what we find is that there is a center in our brain.
Let's just stop a second, and I hope I'm not annoying you folks, but he just said something terribly important. Say it again. Put what inside the body?
Put myth and scripture inside the body.
Put myth and scripture inside the body. You hear this now. This is a way of moving this material, these thought patterns almost would be one way to describe them, into your body, using your body's receptor system to do it. Go ahead, William.
That's right. I mean, just a comment here is helpful, Whitley, that the body is designed, in my view, as a resurrection machine. That is what the body is. Its purpose is to act as the pillar, as the link, as the stairway to heaven from the soul's perspective. And that's what we're all trying to get a hold of here, is the way that we can kickstart this resurrection machine, the way that our soul can climb the ladder to heaven. And in order to do that, we've got to become more and more familiar with our mystic anatomy, or certainly the mystic function of our anatomy. And the particular part of the brain that we're talking about now is the amygdala, which functions as a fear center. It processes fear. When you are in a situation where you feel fear, where your palms get sweaty, where your body temperature changes, this is the amygdala that is responding. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that we have the amygdala as the brain center responsible for overcoming fear, and the name Mary Magdalene, because that is her chief role. In order for Jesus to do what he did, he had to be in a place of pure bliss, in a place of pure love. And it is Mary Magdalene who possessed the means by which to enter that state of pure bliss and pure love. And she did it through the production of scents, through aromas, through spiritual substances that activated these latent powers within us.
Now, people are going to be immediately tempted to think, well, my God, maybe I could make or buy something that would have this odor in it, that it would help me. Now, what are we talking about here? Is that possible?
Well, I think spikenard, because it's referenced, may be one of these substances that will help to trigger this. But overall, what we're talking about is the way that we can begin to achieve this exalted state is simply by choice, by right focus and right concentration on choosing love over fear. That's where it all begins right there. We have to begin to live in what so many call the perfect moment, where we are in the moment and we are constantly focused on the right words, the right thoughts, the right actions. This is, of course, Buddha's Eightfold Path that I'm describing here, and that was the Buddha's prescription for overcoming suffering. Choosing right words, right thoughts, right action, right intention. And what that does is it seems to trigger this essence from within us naturally.
Meaning that if we can get ourselves into the right state, these odors, these scents might be able to really soothe something within us. It's the soothing of this fear that's important, and this is why the Magdalene's whole approach to Jesus, the washing of the feet, it was a process of soothing. And this is terribly, terribly important to understand. And I spent a lot of years in the Gurdjieff Foundation, and Mr. Gurdjieff had another name for this that's very revealing. He called it the organ Kundabuffer. The organ Kundabuffer is an organ placed in the human body to prevent Kundalini energy from rising up the spine. In other words, to prevent you from going up Jacob's ladder. That organ, in one respect, can be viewed as the amygdala when it generates fear response. Now, you understand how very, very deep this is within us. And it's why scent is important, because nothing goes deeper into your being and consciousness and below your consciousness than odors and scents. William, can you tell us a little bit more about what the Magdalene exactly did to Jesus in preparation for this extraordinary moment of resurrection that is commemorated for us in the Shroud of Turin?
Sure, but just before I do that, I want to recommend one other scent, Whitley, and that is the scent of rose. And the reason I recommend that is because the French word rose is so close to the Egyptian word rus, which means gate. And the way we open these gates, I believe, also is through this scent, and certainly the scent of rose is something that we can all keep around us very easily. We can keep roses in a vase, and we can enjoy the scent that way, or we can get concentrated rose oil. So that would be something that I would definitely recommend. Now, getting back to your question, what we have to, again, understand or begin to appreciate is the extensive training that Mary Magdalene must have undergone preparatory to her experience of meeting Jesus on that one night in Capernaum. She, as a priestess of Isis, as a priestess of Inanna, and a priestess of the Syrian goddess Mari, most certainly would have been schooled in the methods by which these individuals, which were called the temple prostitutes or harlots, had the capability of opening gates into other realms. And I've said this several times, that when you really look at the story between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it almost begins to appear that he was her daredevil test pilot, and she was the one that seemed to possess more of the keys of knowledge. And without her, his mission, his revolution, really wasn't going to be going anywhere, because she, in fact, was the one that possessed the secret of this substance that was called Christ, which means anointed, which was called Christos or Krestos, which comes from the Egyptian word karast, spelled K-A-R-A-S-T, which means oil. And by introducing this substance, this essence to Jesus, this is what transformed him into the Christ-like being that we refer to today. And I always encourage people to make the distinction between Jesus the person and Christ as the holy substance, because there is a very distinct difference between the two.
Yes, there is a distinct difference between the two. Jesus was a person, but Christ, the holy substance, can become part of you right now.
That's right.
That's the difference, and it's considerable. The memory, vestigial memory of that is the process of communion that takes place to this day in some Christian, some subgroups of Christianity, most notably, the Episcopalians and the Catholics and a few others. But that's only a symbolic act. We're talking about a real thing that can happen to you here and now. There's reality behind all of these old stories and symbols that we have had that reality forcefully separated from us by the illusions of these institutions that we don't need. We don't need them. We don't need them. Yeah. What do we need, William?
Well, what we need is, I really feel, is to understand our bodies from this perspective, that esoteric Christianity, which again is drawing from so many of these ancient traditions, was dedicated to the revelation of secrets that enable us to put on the new clothes. And that's what I feel like we all need. What we're all attempting to create here is to, from within us, to draw upon these sacred traditions of India, of Iran, of Egypt, of Greece, and the mystical Jewish traditions, and those of the first Christians, and assimilate and formulate the teaching whereby the average individual can ignite our divine self. And we do that by, again, focused intention, but also by understanding the mystical aspects of our body, and that, in fact, this is an amazing gift that we have, this gift of life, and we need to be able to learn how to use this body in its mystic sense rather than to let it be used as a sword in somebody else's battle, which unfortunately is where most of us are at.
As soon as we embrace the yes and the no, yes, this is good, no, that's bad, and we reject one faith for another. I'm a Lutheran and the Methodists are all idiots. Or I'm a Christian and the Buddhists and the Islamic people are all going to hell. Or I am Islamic, and therefore the others are all going to hell. All of that is taking. That is activating the amygdala and making the fear vibration a permanent part of your being so that you never escape. And then you die. And what happens then, William?
Well, for the most part, I personally believe that we're either going to reincarnate or you're going to stay in limbo for a time, and that's just my personal belief. I don't have anything to actually point to that says that's an absolute fact, but that's what I believe.
And this profound forgetting of self being in life that we dignify by the term reincarnation will beset you again, and so it will go until there will come a time when there are no more bodies for us to incarnate into, and there are people who came in here now with a kind of warning saying that the time in which there is going to be a plethora of bodies and plenty of bodies to go around so you can keep doing this is just about over. And then you're left in a state of limbo forever. I mean, maybe for millions of years, for vast, unimaginable amounts of time. You don't need that. Now, as not before in thousands of years, this planet is attuned to ascension. It's really available now. So listen up. William, I want now, with that in mind and bearing that in mind, to begin to talk about another level of energy, the Tower and the Magdalene.
Yeah, this is one of the things that, again, prompted me to write the book. I've kept seeing references to the oil of Mary Magdalene and also references to this mystery of the meaning of the name Magdalene. It's said to mean tower or tower of the flock, and I was very curious, what does that mean? What are we really talking about there? And you have so many great scholars that just seem to repeat the same thing over and over again without really looking more deeply into the meaning of what might be referenced here. And when I began to look into Mary Magdalene's story here, and especially this connection of her name and its meaning of tower, I was really basically shocked to find that it led me right back to the story of the Tower of Babel. What other tower is there of such significance that would cause someone to be called the Tower? And in fact, her name, Mary, means beloved, and so with that, Mary Magdalene actually means the beloved tower. Well, the tower that has been beloved throughout history, the one that has been lost, that we're all seeking to reclaim, is the Tower of Babel, which was, of course, built originally by Nimrod in ancient Iraq. It was called the ladder or stairway to heaven, or the gate to God. And there was a force referred to as Yahweh in the Old Testament that destroyed that tower and separated humankind by language. And ever since that time, for the past 4,000 years or so, we've been seeking the secrets of this tower, the secrets of that gate that will enable us to return to the heavens. And it is Mary Magdalene, I believe, that possessed those secrets of that tower. And that accounts for one reason why she's been so disparaged by the official church authorities.
Well, because of the fact that she represents a kind of freedom. If you embrace this, you soon find out that bypassing the church authorities actually helps you. It's good. It's better.
Right.
Because you bypass a lot of the fear response, which is ingrained from the very beginning in the idea of that we're born with original sin. We're born in that state, and it's just not true.
Can we talk about that just for a moment,
yeah, please,
Whitley? Because that's one of the real fundamental steps that I ask people to take in this book, is that when you go back and you look at the original Babylonian version of sin, where many of these principles were originally laid down, say 600 BC, you find that originally humankind, we didn't worship the gods. We worked for the gods. And the work that we did for the gods was we served them pure food. We served them food, we served them wine, and that food had to be pure because the gods themselves were pure. And what that meant was that the humans serving this food themselves had to be pure. What this means is that the gods taught a select group of humans, which included people like Ezekiel, Elijah, and others. These gods taught them to become gods themselves. And by serving the gods, by working for the gods, we were then able to walk the stars with the gods. The way that the gods knew that you weren't doing the proper work for the gods was you got sick. And that was the original definition of sin. The definition of work for the gods was the great work, what today we call the magnum opus or alchemy. So what this is saying is that originally the Babylonian gods taught humankind the secrets of alchemy so that they themselves could become pure and would live lives free of sin. Now the Bible teaches that we're all sinners, and we don't in fact die of complications from diabetes or strokes or heart attacks. We die because we're sinners. But what they forget to tell you is that the way to overcome sin is not by believing in another God. The way to overcome sin is to do the work, to do the alchemical work that will transform you from an ordinary mortal into an immortal being. And that is the fundamental transformation that the church implemented, by which they began to control people. And I talk about this in several chapters of the Illuminator, and I think it's one of the most important pieces of information in the book, is that we didn't worship the gods, we worked for them, and the work we did was the alchemical transmutation that transformed us into star walkers. And by the way, it's Ezekiel, it's Elijah. There's only one other person in the Bible that's mentioned that overcame sin, that affected this transformation within themselves, and that is Mary Magdalene.
And this, by the way, ancient idea that we would be able to walk the stars is reflected, and I do use that word carefully, in the whole ancient Egyptian religion, in the Osiris legend, in the idea of the resurrection of Jesus, and even in the most unexpected places. I went once to a little place down in South Texas, close to the Mexican border, along the Pecos River, where a dear old friend of mine had found, this is actually his ranch, and it's now been made into something called the Rock Art Foundation, had found, while out hiking one day, the most magnificent piece of rock art in the Americas. And it is called the White Shaman, and there is this wonderful shamanic figure pointing to the journey from the river up through the waters and into the stars. And William, of course, we look at the Osirian, which was probably the most ancient structure in Egypt, if not one of the most ancient in the world, and it has to do with some kind of a water-related ritual, and Jesus, of course, is the fisher of men. Can you tell us a little bit more about water and the relationship of water to ascension into this new state?
Right, yeah, there's constant references, Whitley, to the living waters, which are the cosmic waters, which I feel are cosmic rays. Mary Magdalene was called in France the mistress of the waters, and again, very good scholars suggest that she was called mistress of the waters because she sailed over water when she left Palestine and journeyed to France. Now, again, that satisfies about 99% of the people. But that didn't satisfy me, and so when I started looking into this, especially with the connection between Mary Magdalene and Isis, we find that Isis is also called the mistress of the waters, the lady of the waters. And in fact, what it refers to is this cleansing and purification that we've been talking about throughout our conversation today. It's this ability of us to utilize our body as an antenna to attract these beneficial cosmic rays, these living waters that bring about a cleansing and purification of our body, and in fact represent, I believe, the culmination of the great work that the gods had intended for us to perform.
The great work that the gods, and you've brought these up a number of times, and we're going to be continuing with this discussion next week. And next week, we're going to be talking about things like who they are. Who are they? Who were these gods? Who were the Babylonians in relationship with? What was actually going on there? But before we go this week, William, what I would like to do, and it's going to not be next week, I guess it's going to be, I'm not sure of the schedule, but in any case, there's going to be a second half of this. It will not be placed on the site over Thanksgiving. Let me put it that way. If this goes up this weekend, which we're recording this immediately before the weekend before Thanksgiving, then the second half of it will go up the week after Thanksgiving. Okay, we'll have a rerun over Thanksgiving because let's face it, we're going to be loaded with tryptophans and from Turkey, and no one's going to be in any mood to listen to this intense and heavy stuff. William, we have not talked much about the inner movement that's necessary when we say the kingdom of God is within you. It's such a mysterious phrase. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think of the kingdom of God within as what the alchemists called the divine spark, or the soul drop, which is a tiny fragment of light that grows our physical body. And while incarnate, it attempts to grow a body of light so that it can return to the stars. And in fact, if the body is a hologram of the kingdom of heaven itself, we can think of the body as, we can think of the divine spark or the soul drop as a cocoon wrapped within the body that's attempting to transform into a butterfly. This, of course, again, is the goal of the great work. And first of all, we have to become aware that we have this seed atom or this nucleus that resides within us. And then once we are aware of that, we can begin to meditate on it. We can begin to connect with it through our intuition. And it's through that piece that's within us, that piece of the divine within us, that we connect with the larger kingdom, which most certainly is comprised of at least the 400 billion plus galaxies that science has shown us inhabits the known universe. But, then again, our known universe may just be one bubble among many, many millions, perhaps, of bubbles that contain similar numbers of galaxies.
Interestingly enough, that statement, Sir Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, would agree with. He feels as if, at this point, the mathematics is telling us that the universe is is in a kind of a foam, and each little bubble in the foam contains another universe. And where are we now? We belong to and are part of a planet called Earth, held to that Earth by a kind of spiritual magnetism, a sort of weight, if you will, that binds us here. Now, I alluded to this earlier, and that's what this whole enterprise of Dreamland and Unknown Country ultimately is about. It is about the fact that the planet soon will not be able to support anything like the number of bodies that are needed for the process of reincarnation and the slow accretion of knowledge that is associated with that. What we need to do is we need to learn how to become cosmic beings, to lift ourselves beyond that, to take the human spirit out into the stars. And you don't do that with a starship, or do you? We'll find out the next time we talk to William Henry, be sure, and get the Illuminator before that conversation. Go to the unknowncountry.com store and get it. And please, if you get it, if you have a chance, you haven't subscribed to this radio show or this website yet, keep me going and give me a little subscription. I sure would appreciate it. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss our website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts that others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she's reporting on a remarkable discovery. The sun appears to be heating up. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, first, an important news update about the deadly H5N1 bird flu virus. On November 17th in New York City, before the Council on Foreign Relations, Dr. Robert Webster from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis warned it is possible that people infected with AIDS who already have depressed immune systems could be the first humans that the deadly H5N1 bird flu mutates in and then spreads directly to people. Medical experts fear that could happen when H5N1 reaches East Africa, where HIV/AIDS permeates the population. Also this week, for the first time in mainland China, 3 humans have contracted the lethal H5N1 virus. A teacher, an 11-year-old girl, and her brother. The girl died, her brother recovered, and the teacher is in a hospital. The brother and sister's family kept roosters for cockfights in their yard, and all those birds died as well. But it is not clear how the 3 victims contracted the virus. Now the Chinese government has ordered an unprecedented vaccination of 14 billion farm birds in China. Millions more migratory and farm birds have been destroyed trying to stop the H5N1 spread. While the microbe world of our planet threatens to unleash a pandemic that could kill millions worldwide, astrophysicists are scratching their heads about what's happening on the sun and in our solar system. Why has this so-called solar minimum been so active? It should be quiet now with very few sunspots because this is supposed to be the low point of the sun's 11-year sunspot cycle. But this week, there is a sunspot called 822 that's 87,000 miles across. That's the size of the planet Jupiter. Could it erupt with more powerful X-flares, as has happened the past few months? Big flares threaten all the broadcast, global positioning, and military satellites that now orbit our planet. And as I've reported before on Dreamland and at Earthfiles, the sun is not behaving normally. Is it warming up? Earth's North Pole and Mars' South Pole are melting at a surprisingly rapid rate. Even far-out Pluto seems to show some melting. Is the sun a bigger player in all this than originally thought? In September, NASA reported new evidence from Mars orbiters that, quote, for 3 Martian summers in a row, deposits of frozen carbon dioxide near Mars' South Pole have shrunk from the previous year's size, suggesting a climate change in progress, unquote. The Martian South Polar ice cap shrinking has been accelerating since 1999. According to Michael Malin, principal investigator for the Mars Orbiter Camera, quote, the images documenting changes from 1999 to 2005 suggest the Martian climate is presently warmer, and perhaps getting warmer still, than it was several decades or even centuries ago, unquote. Scientists are not sure if the sun is getting hotter and heating up the entire solar system. Could there be other independent forces on Mars and Pluto that we don't know about that are heating up those planets? Or if the sun is warming up, how much more heat could the sun be adding to Earth's current global warming? In October, scientists at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, released a solar study in which they concluded, quote, the sun might have minimally contributed about 10 to 30% of the 1980 to 2002 Earth global surface warming. Greenhouse gases would still give a contribution, but perhaps not so strong as was thought. We don't know what the sun will do in the future, unquote. Another scientist who is trying to figure out what the sun is doing and what effect it's going to have on Earth and the solar system is Sally Balunis, chair of the Science Advisory Board at the George C. Marshall Institute in Washington, D.C. Dr. Balunis is also an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This week I asked Dr. Balunis about the solar minimum that has not been so minimum and what's happening on Mars and Pluto.
Well, we don't know why the sun has been so peculiar in the past few years. This cycle has not been the rule, though. We've had tremendous amounts of flare activity down at solar minimum. Now, part of the problem is we see the sun through a very limited lens, the lens of very short time scales. We've been only able to study the sun in detail above the atmosphere of the Earth through the spacecraft era, so not more than 40 years. And we know the sun varies on time scales of seconds to eons, to billions of years, and we don't have all those well defined.
And would you say right now that from your point of view that the sun is acting oddly?
That's an excellent question. I'd say the sun always acts odd because we have such limited knowledge about what is normal for the sun. During the 17th century, almost 400 years ago, the sun's magnetic field output was extraordinarily low for almost a century. That happens every few centuries. That's odd, but it's not rare. Mm-hmm. The sun right now is probably, averaging over several decades, is the most active it's been in 400 years. Is that odd? Is it rare? Probably not. There's indications of the sun's magnetism going back through time. And maybe 800 or to 1,200 years ago, the sun may have been more active. So what's normal for the sun? Don't know.
And could it explain global warming in and of itself?
How does that look against the temperature records? It matches up pretty well at the beginning of the 20th century, but it doesn't match up so well now. The surface temperature seems to have risen a little more dramatically than the sun has in recent decades. Mm-hmm. So in terms of just a straightforward link between the two, an association between the two, it looks like the sun has not been the cause of most of the late 20th century warming. It could have a contribution. We measure the sun directly, and we measure its total energy output, and that's been measured by satellite for about 25 years now. So we know the sun's energy output has been increasing with the magnetic cycle. We know right now, because we're in a low point in that 11-year cycle, that the sun has backed off a little bit in its energy, but it's going to be on the rise again. Now, over 25 years, there's evidence from several researchers suggest that there's been a subtle rise in the background, and that also may be contributing to the amount of energy the Earth receives. But in terms of Mars, on Mars, one of the polar caps is pulling back. The ice of the polar cap is melting back and leaving some very interesting layering and shelving there that can be measured by the crop of satellites we currently have on Mars. Mars has, it's not clear that Mars responds to these, is responding very quickly to these changes of the sun because we just don't have enough detailed measurements of Mars to say so. Mars has warmed and cooled in the past. When we look back at pictures of Mars, we see that events have gone on where there have been maybe, it looks like river gullies with maybe subsurface frozen ice melting, coming up through the surface and causing some valleys and grooves on Mars. Pluto, well, boy, it's hard to say what's going on there. Pluto is probably very little affected by the amount of radiation the sun puts out. For one reason, it's so far away. Mm-hmm. Another reason, we just don't understand what's going on Pluto. There's a lot of chemical reactions, gas reactions in its atmosphere, and Pluto does have a highly eccentric orbit, but there you're talking about changes on timescales of thousands of years, mm-hmm. not the 11-year cycle. So it isn't clear that they're linked to the sun in any direct way, but as I said, our view of the sun is so limited in time that it's hard to rule a lot of things out. It's worth looking at. It's a very good question.
Well, if the sun were not causing warming on Mars and Pluto, what could cause warming on Mars and Pluto?
Well, Mars has seasons, very long-term changes, and there are changes in its atmosphere that occur on time scales of months. So dust storms crop up. We don't know why those dust storms crop up. And chemical reactions that shift energy around in the system, and that the system finally responds. So, like the Earth, the climate of Mars is complicated, and there are changes going on many different time scales.
And is there any evidence that there could be some kind of interior heating on Mars?
You look at the surface of Mars, and there are the remnants of volcanoes. There's only older volcanoes now, the old shield volcanoes, very gradual volcanoes. But it looks like Mars still may have some seismic activity, but nothing like volcanic and seismic activity, but nothing like the drama we have here on Earth. So yes, there are internal changes on Mars. There are shifts in energy internally on Mars that are also going to crop up and interact and then interact with the climate system and cause some changes.
Would any of this, the sun or internal heating on Mars, explain why there's glacial ice melting at the poles?
Don't know. And right now everybody is looking to see whether they think these changes are linked to the sun. The first thing you'd ask is, well, do you see the sun's well-known 11-year cycle and the glacial and the ice pullback of the caps of Mars? And the answer is, well, probably not. We've had enough information, and it doesn't seem very well correlated with the sun's very familiar 11-year cycle. So then you'd ask, okay, well, if not the 11-year cycle, which we know so much about, then what of the sun is causing this pullback? And then the question is, well, while the sun is active, we don't think that's a real direct source of heating. You know, it's putting out a lot of flares, but they don't put out a lot of warmth, a lot of energy that would melt ice. So then it would require some unusual mechanisms on Mars, in the Mars climate system, coming from the stream of particles from the sun or some of these flares. That's very far out. So there's not a good explanation right now.
What are some of the working hypotheses?
Oh, for the pullback of ice on Mars, mm-hmm. Mars's climate is very dynamic, as the Earth's is, and there are changes on most timescales. For example, we see windstorms kick up every few years on Mars, and no one has a good explanation of those. When you kick up a lot of dust in the windstorm in the Mars atmosphere, you very much change the amount of energy in the system. Mars's climate system is poorly understood.
And is it then fair to say that it is a true mystery about why the pole ice is melting?
I think so, and it's a good mystery. I like it when our ideas about science get overturned, with some very good and careful measurements, and those are very interesting.
And so this is really recent, this change.
Yes, it's recent, and that's why it's a good stab to start by looking at the sun, which we know changes over a decade. You know, that's probably on the order of what it takes, the time scale that we're talking about, years to decades.
Mm-hmm.
So then the first suspect is always the sun when you see something changing on a decadal scale like that.
And, you know, it makes me pause when I realize that global warming is such a major issue, and the weather on the Earth seems to be changing, and it may be linked more to CO2 buildup, but that we understand so little about the sun, actually, and the impact that it could have on our whole weather and climate system.
It's a very interesting question. The sun has varied in the past. The sun will continue to vary in the future because there's no theory that says the sun should suddenly be quiescent. That would be too much to ask. A quiet sun would be easier to explain than a varying sun. And if it's changed in the past, you can look back into the periods where humans didn't exist and humans hadn't put CO2 in the ecosystem, and there you can see correlated changes with known changes on the sun. So then you ask, well, what causes that? Well, we don't know. Then you ask, well, we'll predict that for the future. We can't. So you have to worry that how do we go about this process? There are natural changes going on within the climate system on Earth. Volcanoes erupt. The ocean currents change in the Pacific Ocean, or they change in the Atlantic Ocean, and those cause profound climate effects. They have the sun changing. So many changes on many timescales. What's causing it? We just can't put the picture together. Add carbon dioxide inputted to the atmosphere on top of that from human activities, and also add, which has only recently been appreciated, that humans have changed landscape. For example, we've cut down areas of prairie to build farms or forests to build farms. That seems to have had not only profound local change in temperature and other indicators of climate, but also depending on where the change is and how big it is locally, they actually affect further and more distant areas. So we now have to worry about human changes from carbon dioxide, from landscape modification, and from things like soot.
Mm-hmm. When was the last time on the Earth that there was this much carbon dioxide or more, and what were the temperatures then?
I like to look at it's called the Ordovician, 440 million years ago, when the carbon dioxide levels were, say, 10 times higher than they were today, but the Earth was in a very glacial state, a very strong ice age. So, it says we just don't know what's going on.
Oh, just so I'm clear, but during this period in the Ordovician, there was 10 times the amount of CO2 now, but it was a glacial planet.
Right. In fact, such an ice age that it's almost called an ice ball by some people. Very, very severe glaciation.
And would that suggest to you and other astrophysicists that had to have been linked directly to something going on in the sun?
What a good question to ask if something like the Ordovician is caused by the sun. I have struggled with this. We have no information on the sun on those long periods.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even tell you with any certainty. I can tell you maybe what the sun does on timescales of thousands of years, but then going back 1 million, and this one is 440 million, half a billion years, we have very little information, with nothing. Now, the rise in temperature that's happened at the end of the 20th century has been fairly modest. And so if one wants to ascribe that all to the air's increased carbon dioxide content and the other greenhouse gases, then you can say, well, it's just been a fairly modest rise, and over decades, we have time to react to this.
And could it be offsetting a possible other ice age that would be part of a cycle, and ironically, global warming might prevent it?
Well, if if so, and we're in an ice age, and we're in one of the interglacial periods of the ice age, the current ice age, began a 2 million years ago in earnest. And we are in the warm interglacial, and we shall return to the terrible glacial period, the very harsh glacial period, when no one knows, maybe a few thousand years. Could the carbon dioxide we've put in the air forestall that? Maybe, but we're only talking about forestalling it by at most a few decades, because we are committed to address, we are going forward with addressing carbon dioxide emissions, and I believe I'm a futurist optimist, and I believe in 100 years and 50 years we won't be using fossil fuels anyway, so they will drop down out of the atmosphere naturally. So at most you're going to stave off an ice age 100 years. That's not really relevant.
So you do expect that there will definitely be another ice age?
Another glacial period of the ice age. Oh, yes. Yes, we are. Yeah, if the past is any prediction of the future, and we do think in science that that's a reasonable assumption here in the case of the glacial and interglacial periods, yeah, they seem to recur. The glacial periods seem to recur and last for about 100,000 years, with pauses in them, with warm pauses in them, and then a 10,000-year interglacial, 100,000-year glacial. That's been the pattern that's been established over the past million years.
So it's only 10,000 interglacial, the way it warms up, which is what we're in now, and then it goes to 100,000 years of ice.
Yes, and by ice we mean, for example, that the polar caps, which now have about 10% ice coverage in surface area, will expand to about 30%. In North America, that means most of Canada gets covered with ice. The ice sheet will cover northern New England, for example. Boston will be covered with ice. Probably make it down to New York, maybe the edge, maybe a little bit further south, depending on the individual conditions, the severity of this individual glacial period.
Can you imagine what this would do?
That's the average. No, I can't. I think that's the challenge for humankind, is to try to survive that.
And one of the things that I have learned is that the comparison between the carbon dioxide level now and global warming and the Ordovician is this. The Ordovician was a time when we had Gondwanaland, when most of what we think of as continents were together, and that's when they began to separate. And that may have contributed a great deal to moisture movement on the Earth, and that might explain the paradox of why there was very high CO2 levels then, but it went into a freezing climate. And this just underscores how complex it all is, Whitley, and that we're living at a time when scientists themselves are very puzzled about what is happening on the sun.
Well, and here on the Earth, Linda, because we have just had, in the past couple of weeks, one of the most phenomenal weather experiences in the United States. It's interesting. It's hardly being reported anymore in the big national media. I suppose they're bored with the weather now, or perhaps some movie stars kicking up a fuss. I really don't know, because I don't follow it very much. However, I don't know if you've noticed, but just in the past few weeks, there have been over 20 people killed in the United States in absolutely phenomenal bad weather. With tornadoes, I've been getting stories in from readers and listeners to the effect that they have never seen weather like this at this time of year where they are. And right. It was interesting that this scientist was not willing to commit herself at all about the effect of sunspots on the weather, or indeed about the relationship between the weather and the sun. And I have to tell you, I think it's irresponsible of the solar sciences community that as a community it has not made more of an effort to pin down the relationship between what happens on the sun and what happens to the earth. It's outrageous.
I think it's because it's so frustrating to them that they really can't get a handle on the sun. We still don't know why ice ages have really, truly occurred. And there are so many mysteries, and I think I've talked with so many scientists about the sun in the last couple of years, and they really, truly are baffled. And remember that scientist that I interviewed for Dreamland who talked about the bet that is going on between 2 or 3 very prestigious scientific institutions about whether or not by 2010 to 12, in what is supposed to be solar maximum, will the sun just be blasting off X flares all over the place, or will it go the other way of no sunspots and plunge the Earth back into cold temperatures? And that right now is actually a scientific debate coming up in the next 5 to 6 years.
Well, I hope it's not too late. That's all I can say. I'm really serious about that, because it seems to any outside observer, when you see the other planets visibly heating up and Earth heating up, well, why can't we? And then they say, well, they don't know whether it has to do with the sun or not. What else could it have to do with?
Well, that's what they're trying to figure out. Dr. Balunas is, too. And she's at least open-minded to be trying to figure it out, but it is so difficult. And as she said, Pluto is so far away that if there is a mechanism that is direct to the sun, we just don't have a clue. And if these are internal mechanisms that are happening on the planet, why should they be happening at the same time now? We really have a tremendous number of mysteries here, and there is no question that there is heating on Mars, there is heating on the Earth, there may be something heating some portions of Pluto. If it is linked to the sun, then is it something that the sun does on some sort of a cyclic basis that is still completely off the radar of human science?
Well, we have had periods of the past, within the more recent fossil record, where we have seen extraordinary, violent weather. 5,200 years ago, glaciers formed in Peru and Switzerland, not overnight, but in minutes. And they have just now, in Peru, Dr. Lonnie Thompson of the Bird Polar Research Institute is just now digging down to the basis of some of these 5,200-year-old glaciers and finding quick frozen plants. Oh, yeah. You would see the Iceman in Switzerland was overtaken in an alpine meadow by a storm that turned into a glacier that just melted 5 years ago.
And those mammoths that they found with buttercups in their mouths. Right. You're making such a good point, because no one has ever been able to quite explain that. Could it have been an asteroid or a comet suddenly hitting the Earth that caused those kinds of sudden freezings, or something else?
Well, look, in the past few days, we've had tornadoes across the United States, temperatures plunging in the eastern United States by 30 degrees in an hour in some places, people killed. Meanwhile, in Australia, there have been tornadoes smashing the place up. What do you think could be going on? I have to say that when you see both the northern hemisphere and the mid-southern hemisphere having similar kinds of unexpected weather upheavals, I have to think about my own and Art's book, The Superstorm, frankly, or the terrible 24 months of hell from hurricanes. Summer before last, hurricane after hurricane smashing through Florida, and then this summer an entire city taken out.
Right, with Katrina and Whitley. If there are more Katrinas next year and the year after, how are governments, taxpayers ever going to be able to pay for this kind of unpredictable destruction?
Not to mention the insurance industry. If there is another storm on the scale of Katrina next year, parts of the insurance industry are going to come to an end. Already, there are numerous insurers who are not in trouble yet, but will be in trouble in the next 6 months. So, and plus, the impossibility of rebuilding. The question is, if we rebuild New Orleans, can even the kinds of levees we could construct really survive a Category 5 hurricane, or could there even be a larger hurricane? How fast can rotational winds get on this planet?
Very good question.
We don't actually know. We know that 280 miles an hour is about the top speed for winds on this planet, but there's a lot of distance between that speed and the fastest hurricane force winds we've ever seen and the fastest tornadoes we've ever seen. So
right, and there was one F3 that went through Indiana just a few days ago, and that F3 is getting up between 150 and 200 miles an hour.
Exactly, and incidentally, if you want to see that F3, you should subscribe to the gosh, I'm going back in time, to the unknowncountry.com newsletter by going to unknowncountry.com and simply putting your email address in the newsletter slot. It doesn't cost a penny, and we do not sell your email address to anyone. In fact, you will not get spammed if you do this. Our email addresses are entirely private. And you would read about that and see a picture a storm chaser took of that tornado and sent it to us with a comment that he'd never seen anything like it in 20 years of storm chasing.
And our bottom line is that with all of these issues about heating, we know the Earth is heating up. And every computer model, no matter what the source of the heating is, every computer model says that with every degree Fahrenheit in temperature that the global average surface goes up, you get more and more dynamics in the entire weather system, which means more violent weather in some places, desertification in others, flooding in others. It's going to be an increasingly dramatic, I think, mixed bag.
Well, I think so, too, and I think we're going to see some of that drama, in fact, this winter. Incidentally, Linda, if I may ask, I was appalled by the gaps in knowledge that your guest revealed, not in her knowledge, but in the knowledge of the field itself. And Let me ask you this.
Every solar scientist I've talked to, an astrophysicist, talked, and they stress how little we know about the sun.
But why? I mean, isn't there some way of studying it? Because our lives and our civilization depend on it absolutely, and it's obviously not acting normally now. She said that, at least. But what is happening? And they really don't know, do they? Not at all.
Right. And she stressed something that even though it may seem like it's obvious, I don't think it is to most people, when she explained we only have 25 years of satellite measuring on what's happening with the sun's energy output. That's only a quarter of a century, 2.5 decades. That's not a lot of data to get any handle on something as complex and old as the sun. And that, I think, says everything. Scientists are playing catch-up with a system with the first time ever with instruments that we could do accurate measuring. We just don't have any long timeline on records. We don't know why there have been ice ages and will continue to be.
Well, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow either. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much. It has been quite an enlightening and actually too unenlightening a presentation, because it's obvious that these scientists urgently need to know more about what is going on, because this thing is falling apart around our ears and anyone can see it. Next week on Dreamland, it will be Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll be talking about something that has absolutely nothing to do with Thanksgiving. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, some incredible discoveries made by Ross Hamilton. How does the Great Serpent Mound work? What is the Great Serpent Mound? Well, we're going to have a lot of fun next week, so don't miss Dreamland. Then the week after, we return to the no commercials format and more exploration of the Illuminator with William Henry, the most important interruptions in this edition of Dreamland, either on our free stream or, of course, as there never are for our subscribers. And the reason is that people often ask me, why do I do this? Why do I keep doing it? and I'm not on the air anymore. It's because largely I don't want to be on the air anymore. I'm not really talking to that audience. I'm talking to people who want to seek this out. These are the people who are important and to me, and the people who I want to reach. I'm not really interested in reaching people who just by some chance happen to tune across the dial and hear something slightly vaguely interesting to them. You're into this. That's why you're here on this website. And William Henry has come up with something I think that's terribly important, because it is a step beyond where we all are right now in terms of spiritual growth in the direction needed to face the time of change that is already upon us. As I speak, the weather in the Midwest and the northeastern United States has been ultra wild recently. People are dead from unexpected tornadoes coming down out of the night. Temperature gradients have dropped 30 degrees in some areas in just a few minutes. And everyone knows about all the hurricanes, the other storms, the earthquakes, and so forth. And 2012 is still years away. We've got a lot of distance to travel between now and then. And because you want to travel this distance toward consciousness rather than away from it, you're listening to this right now. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome William Henry to this radio program on this very special experience of talking about his new book, The Illuminator.
Thank you, Whitley. Thanks again very much for having me on the show.
Well, you know, I'm pretty surprised at certain things that you've done in this book. Let me ask you first, and I've asked you this question before, and you never give me a straight answer. And yet now I see from the beginning, when I discovered your work through Nick Begich of Earth Pulse Press, your first early book that he published, I was so struck by the degree of kind of hidden knowledge that you possessed. And that has gone on and on and on until now you come up with something so extraordinary in The Illuminator that I was very amazed when I opened the pages of this, and it felt like information that I had always known, but that had
that I like to cite, and to use contemporary vernacular, contemporary vernacular is the word terror. I mean, we hear politicians come on television all the time talking about, hey, we're winning the war on terror. And sometimes if they're from the South, they'll say that, they'll pronounce it by saying, we're winning the war on terror. And to my ear, it sounds like what they're saying is the word Tara, spelled T-A-R-A, which is in fact a Buddhist term. It's a term for the Buddhist goddess of compassion. And it makes me wonder if, in fact, there is a war on compassion and enlightenment that is unfolding in our world right now. It shows us in this very simple example how the power of our words can have such a dramatic impact.
Well, there is such a war, and it unfolded. The whole war was initiated with a single gunshot, a bullet moving out of a gun in Serbia and into the head of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which destabilized our world. That instability has continued ever since. Our world has literally lost its ability to direct itself. It is crashing. It's going down in flames. Now, we've had a respite when the defeat of first the Nazis and then communism should have brought in an era of peace, but the world leadership was quick to make certain that did not happen. Why, William, would they do that when we had the chance, after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the collapse of the Soviet Union, to become a much more peaceful world? Why didn't we?
Well, based upon the research that I did for the Illuminator in researching the early Gnostic Christian relationship with a group of beings who called themselves archons or rulers. We seem to be dealing with a relationship between the powers that be and an extraterrestrial force that feeds on human fear, that seeks to keep us in a realm of terror. I mean, I was astounded to the way that this word terror was reintroduced in such a massive way into our vocabulary back in 2001. At that time, I had been researching the Maya prophecies that said that we're entering an era between the year 2000 and 2012 in which we would be experiencing an increase of compassion and enlightenment in our world. In fact, we would be entering an age of terror, of compassion and enlightenment. And suddenly, here comes this word terror that seems to have a connection with the stars built right into ourselves. And so what I've attempted to do is to look at the body as the temple. I reference Solomon's temple, for example, in the book. And one way we can think of Solomon's temple is that it is literally the soul's temple. And that's what the human body is, in my view.
Now, soul, in this sense, also refers to light, to the sun.
That's right. Yes, it does.
Tell us a little bit about that relationship.
Well, you have that funny wordplay of soul spelled S-O-L, which means sun, it means light, and then you have S-O-U-L, which refers to our divine essence, the soul. And it's very interesting the way that those terms come together in a word such as Solomon, in the reference to Solomon's temple.
Now, these words, and one of the things about your work that's so fascinating to me is that, and this is more true as time goes on, but you're beginning to use relationships between, for example, the many ancient Egyptian words that have entered the English language in one way or another, and the hidden structures in those words in English. And you speak of an author who has been one of my favorites for many, many years of my life, Harold Bailey.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, tell us who he was and why the work he did is so important in the larger sense.
Harold Bailey was an early 20th century British author. He was very interested in the language symbolism. In fact, he has a book that's still available today, a 2-volume set called The Lost Language of Symbolism, in which he chronicled the Cathar's use of ancient symbols. And he was among the first to really connect the Cathar symbols with other cultures, such as Egypt, to reveal the incredible mystic knowledge that the Cathars possessed. But in addition, Harold Bailey also used phonetic resonance between words in English to reveal otherwise hidden meanings. And this is something that caught my attention, and as I started to work with this process of using phonetic resonance in English, it started to open up some incredible doors that most people aren't even aware existed.
Well, tell us a little bit about the doors that it opened up.
Well, for me, Whitley, what it showed is that, wait a minute, there is this interconnection between all of these languages, and that by following this trail of words that sound alike in English, suddenly we're connecting things that seemingly don't belong together, but when you look at it, it makes perfect sense that they belong together.
Now, give us some examples of what you mean here.
Well, one of the classic examples
never kind of articulated itself in my mind, like you unlocked a door. And William, I want to know your version. And I know that how do you do this?
Well, it's a constant process for me of amassing historical information, new data, always looking for that missing piece of the puzzle that seems to elude us all the time. And it just seems that as you pick up one piece, there's yet another piece that needs to be picked up. I've so often reminded myself and others that I think that people so often talk about the truth as if there is one whole truth, but in fact what we're dealing with are shards of the truth, pieces of it that get picked up, and every now and then we claim that small piece is the actual truth, but really it's just part of a larger whole. And it's been my constant quest to gather as many of those pieces as possible.
Well, William, there is structurally across the whole body of your work a kind of progression of insight, and this partly reflects study. I know that, but the critical insight in the Illuminator is so far beyond anything else. And folks, what we're going to be talking about is, I'm not playing games with you. I'm not going to do radio talk show host tricks, which I know very well how to do, to put off the key stuff and put it off until right at the end we finally say, and the skeleton was in, and then you hear the music and it's over. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay. In the Illuminator, you begin to talk about a physical relationship between the body and the soul, and a way of reaching enlightenment through, I believe, if I'm not correct, if I understand the first part of it correctly, the alchemy of scent. But let's first talk about the skeleton. Tell us, William, a little bit about what you have found out about the human skeleton.
Well, the human skeleton is what we think of as the temple. Whenever we're in a piece of myth or scripture and we see the word temple referenced, we can substitute with the words human skeletal structure. The bones are, in a sense, an archive of ancient knowledge, and if we can learn how to tap into the bones, they will reveal the secrets of where we came from, who we are. I mean, after all, our bones are literally composed of matter that was sprung from supernova explosions in distant galaxies, and because of that, we have fix us like dogs chained to a pole to this frequency of fear. And the only explanation that I can have for the reason why they would want us to be chained in this way to the word terror is because they know that an unstoppable force is entering into our world. A new light is emerging, and the last thing they want to have happen is to have a civilization full of enlightened people, or people that are on the path to enlightenment.
At what points is this entering our world?
At what point is it entering?
At what points is this new light entering? Yes.
Well, it's an individual by individual basis. I travel a lot, and it's amazing to me the sheer number of new people that are suddenly awakening. And this is occurring on a daily basis because of works like, well, recently the Da Vinci Code, and others that are starting to awaken people that, wait a minute, there is another version to this story. And when they begin to look at the parallel version, especially of the Christian story, and they jump tracks into the esoteric or Gnostic version of the story, this is what is driving their awakening. And this is why I feel that there's such a rise of fundamentalism on the planet right now, why the various governments and religions are trying to lock down various sacred places, why people are trying to dig their roots deep into the past and try and stay there. But everything that we see about us is causing change and asking us to awaken to this change, and in fact to become a part of it.
The really important work, folks, goes on behind the scenes. In other words, what these world leaders are doing to prevent access to important material in Egypt, thanks to Zahi Hawass and his friends, or to destroy materials or steal them or hide them in some way in Iraq, thanks to our games that we're playing there. That doesn't actually matter. What matters is that you not let that use you to eat your energy. Those items are of no importance, because what is really of importance is something that this gentleman, William Henry, knows a whole lot about. It's in our bodies. Now, William, just before we go on, since we have no ads this time, folks, I want to remind you, the Illuminator is available from the unknowncountry.com bookstore. You can get it. It's there. Do get it. Do read it. And also, I will remind you that this thing keeps going because of your subscription.